Hey guys, and welcome back to my still fairly little channel. I appreciate every one of you who has subscribed. There's a few more of you lately, and I don't know, I'm enjoying sharing these random films with you. This time I wanted to talk about Return to Oz from 1985. I almost didn't review this. Because it's a film that I watched as a kid, and I sort of felt like maybe I was a bit too, I don't know, I was gonna say like close to the material, but I think sometimes when we, really love a film and we've seen it a few times, it's almost like you don't see it anymore. But then I thought, maybe some of you haven't seen it, and I think it's a really good film. So I thought I'd share it. It's a mid-80s film. It stars Fairuza Balk. I think that's how you pronounce her name. It's her first feature film role. You might recognize her from The Craft. She's in The Waterboy. She's in American History X. And it also stars Jean Marsh, Piper Laurie, and Brian Henson, as well as some other wonderful people. It was directed by Walter Murch. He did sound on Apocalypse Now, The Conversation, Jarheads, Cold Mountain. He also works as an editor. He's an Oscar winner, and he's actually the only person to win an Oscar on one film for editing and sound. So he's been instrumental in his career in raising sound design from being he's basically made it something that can now be considered an art form as opposed to like just a technical thing. Fun little side fact about Walter Murch: he actually is a beekeeper. He raises bees. I thought you might like to know that. So Return to Oz is based on the books by Frank Baum, who wrote the original Wizard of Oz book. The plot is taken from Marvelous Land of Oz and Ozma of Oz, so that's from 1904 and 1907 respectively. Dorothy Gale is back. She's struggling to return to normality after her adventures in Oz. In an attempt to help her, she's taken to a doctor, but the doctor has plans to do some very sinister experiments on her in his asylum. While she's there, a strange girl helps her escape, and she finds her way back to Oz. But things with her old friends in their world are very wrong. The Nome King has taken over, and her friends are in trouble. She sets out to help them with the help of TikTok, Jack Pumpkinhead, and a talking chicken. So this film is sort of an unofficial sequel to the 1939 film. The 1939 film was an MGM colorful musical, and this is a Disney 80s live action. So definitely a lot of differences, even just from knowing that much. Both films, interestingly, did not do well on release, but gained a following over time. And I always find that really interesting with the 1939 Wizard of Oz, is that it's considered a classic now, but it was considered a bomb at the time. Nobody liked it, which is sad because it's such a good film. Anyway, The Wizard of Oz, as I said, was an MGM musical, and that film has the brightness, little dance numbers, a cuteness that was expected of a film from MGM of that time period. So this film has a lot of the darkness and intriguing visuals that 80s children's films are much more known for. A lot of 80s era children's films had really scary stuff in them. Even like to adults. I mean, I wouldn't say they're scary for adults, but watching them as an adult, you can see how unsettling they are and dark. Flight of the Navigator has a scene where the main character is a kid who returns home and his parents aren't there, and a bunch of time has passed, and it's really distressing to watch. Labyrinth is another one. Dark, funny visuals. There's a scene at the start of the film where the baby is kidnapped by the Goblin King, and there's a dark room and an empty crib and things like that. So yeah, I mean, films for kids were dark. This film has mental asylums, shock treatments, and the land of Oz. When she's there, some of the characters that we know from the other film, I should say, are just turned to stone. So I think that's quite intense for kids. So Murch stated that he was partly inspired by the book Wisconsin Death Trip, which is kind of a nice little neo-Gothic rabbit hole to go down if you ever feel the need. It's the book that came out in the 70s, but it's photographs and short news stories about what was going on in a town in Wisconsin in the 1890s. So a lot of the look and the feel was inspired by that book for this film. It's kind of one of those things where, you know, we look back fondly on history of like a simpler time and that kind of thing. But really, I mean, as this book shows, it's all true stuff. And there's people committing suicide and losing children and, you know, like disasters that were every day for people back then. And a lot of people were, you know, made increasingly fragile by what was going on in their lives and the pressures of that kind of life. So there's plenty of stories in the book of people just losing touch with their reason. And so that's why in this film, it's much darker. Dorothy is dealing with a much more real world. Not literally the kinds of things that happen in Wisconsin Death Trip, but just a little bit more in touch with the way, you know, mental health was dealt with back then. So first, maybe third of the film takes place in Kansas under this kind of, you know, pressure. So yeah, it's dark. When she does make it to Oz, a little special mention to a couple of characters that for me are maybe the darkest. There is the Nome King, which is such a great animated sequence, but for me what always has stayed in my mind are the Wheelers, who are characters who have wheels instead of hands and feet, and they're just strange and unsettling and a little mad, and I feel like the actors are having a lot of fun playing them, but they're definitely, as a child watching this, there's something that sticks with you as being really just unsettling. And then Mombi, who is also a character from Baum's original books. She's kind of a witch-like character played by Jean Marsh. Jean Marsh also plays a nurse at the hospital where Dorothy is taken at the start of the film. So she plays Mombi. She sort of comes across as a princess type and draws them into her mirrored palace and offers to help them, but you get the sense that there's something very sinister about her. We later see that she steals the head of beautiful girls and swaps them out onto her own body to get whatever look she wants. So she just swaps heads to get a different look of the day. There's actually a hallway in the castle where all her heads are kept, and it's really unsettling and terrifying. It's actually really great. So those are my kind of the elements that stick in my mind. I think everybody probably has different ones for this film that kind of unsettled them in some way. I think the problem with this film for some people is that if you come to this version of Oz via MGM, you're expecting a bright and happy place, and this movie has an emotionally older Dorothy, one who's dealing with more real-world problems. The imagery here comes from the Frank Baum creations and books. Though his books are never really dark, he didn't really believe in scaring children. But they do have unsettling characters and ideas sometimes, much like nursery rhymes can, and fairy stories can have sort of unsettling ideas. So when it's filmed, this kind of translates into some very scary images and ideas, like the Wheelers. For example, Baum also often used his books to make fun of types of people or concepts or social mores that he saw around him. For example, in the book The Wizard of Oz, when they go to the Emerald City, it only appears green because everyone has to wear eyeglasses with a green lens. And as you remember from the MGM film, the wizard is a phony. So Baum kind of plays on this kind of naivety that people have, or sort of common scams, snake oil, that kind of, or even just social things that people accept. So there's a little of this darkness or cynicism here. Personally, I like the darkness of this film, and I absolutely loved it when I first saw it as a kid. It was already a classic by the time I was a kid. So it's different, but I think one of the reasons it works so well is because it has a solid plot and the characters feel really well-rounded to me. The character design is really good. There's a chicken who talks. Her name is Bellina. And she's characterized so well. She's just a talking chicken, but she has a real kind of hen attitude. TikTok is amazing. He's a round, shiny man who needs to be wound up. He's basically clockwork. He's like a pocket watch brought to life. He really kind of looks like one. He has a little mustache that moves when he talks. It's adorable. So I really like him. Jack Pumpkinhead is also part of the original Oz. He's definitely kind of weird. His face doesn't really move when he talks and stuff like that. He's got a pumpkin for a head, so he's kind of unsettling. But I think he's really great. Definitely a little bit weird, but that's okay. The Gump is a flying couch with a moose head made from things in Mombi's attic, and I think it's her attic, but he's basically just a interesting thrown together character who I really like. The Scarecrow makes an appearance here. His face doesn't move, which I think is much like, to me, he looks very much like old theater photographs I've seen of people who played the Scarecrow back in the author's day. So I feel like they've really gone back to the source material, but it is unsettling. So yeah, I didn't really know until recently that some people think that this film is a bad film, like it has a reputation as being a bad film. I have met people who don't like it, but mostly because it scared the pants off them when they were young. I know a lot of people who really love it. I love it. It just seems odd to me to see it as a bad film. I know it didn't do well in the box office when it came out, but it's really very good and fits really well into the canon of children's films of the 80s era. So I think one of the reasons it might not have done well at the box office is partly because it was kind of billed a little bit as being a successor to the earlier MGM film, which I don't think it really is. You could definitely, if you like Oz, you might like both of those films, for example, but I don't think they make a very good double bill. It did get an Oscar nomination for Best Visual Effects, and it has a cult following now, but yeah, apparently it really didn't. And I've seen some interesting articles of people saying, like, I'm writing to defend this film, and I'm like, defend it from who? I thought everybody loved it. With changes to Disney's management during the making of this film, the director was given a really hard time, and at one point he was even taken off the film. He was friends with Scorsese and George Lucas, and they really believed in him as a director. So they stepped in and had him reinstated on this film, but he hasn't actually directed a film since. He has a really strong and long career in sound and editing, and I think his IMDb said that, you know, he'd like to direct again one day, but I think because this film didn't do well and there were some problems with, not so much with him, but just with the changing management and different things, he just hasn't had the opportunity to direct again. I hope that he will. He's probably a little on the older side now. I don't know if he's retired or not, but I think this film is really well directed. So yeah, I mean, this film might be a little odd compared to the Wizard of Oz film, or even maybe a little dark compared to the colorful books, which sort of were on the lighter, more humorous side in tone, but there's some little dark moments in there. I think this would definitely appeal to people who like the books quite a lot. And if you are interested in reading some of the books in the series, there's a really good annotated copy with the original illustrations that's definitely worth getting. It's the one that I have, and it's fascinating because there's so much that went on around the writing of the book and changes that were happening in the world and the emergence of film and different things basically that were just going on. So it's a really interesting book that came out at a really interesting time, and there are many sequels to the original Wizard of Oz. So yeah, the annotated version is definitely a good addition if you do want to read it. But yeah, I definitely recommend this film. It's a favorite of mine. I do like to rewatch it every now and then. I tend to remember certain things, and then when I watch it, I'm like, oh, I totally forgot about this. It's really dark. But I think it's a really good film. So if you haven't seen it, maybe haven't even heard of it, give it a watch. I know some people hate it, but I think it's really good. So thank you for joining me on my little journey into Return to Oz. I appreciate every one of you who watches and subscribes and all of those things. And I'll be back again with another film to share with you very soon.